the shortlist is done. I've read all 6 pretty much back to back, and this should be the last one I do of those books, of that shortlist. So this is the last book on the list. It's the longest one, and I would say it's probably my favourite. And that book is Whale by Cheon Myeong-Kwan. Ooh, if I pronounce that wrong, I'm going to get flamed. Right, you might know this book because it was on the long list, and then the short list. I know this book because BTS like it, and what I do with books is, if I see that Jimin and Jungkook have liked it, then I read it. And if they have not, it goes back in the fucking trash where it belongs. Right, this book, Whale, it's about a woman named Geumbok, and she is this very ambitious woman, and she decides to build a movie theater when she moves to this small town, and she fucks every man there. And there's also a woman who can control bees, and there's also this mute girl who's her daughter, and she goes to prison at one point, and there's also an elephant, and then everyone dies really unhappily, and there's an old crone as well, there's a very old woman, and that's the plot of Whale. Generally speaking, I really like this book. I think it's very well written, it's immensely readable, it's incredibly easy to read, but it has some problems with, like, immaturity that fuck with my head and remove some of the main sort of social themes. They make me question them because of certain aspects of the writing, and that includes the structure and some of the content. If you want a good suggestion of how good the writing is, read the opening scene, which is where the mute daughter returns to the brickyard. You can probably find a preview of that online, maybe Google has one of those, and it's just a fantastic opening, the first 20 or so pages. When I read those, I went, I'm in, like, I'm totally locked in, and I wish that writing was throughout the rest of the book. And sometimes it is, sometimes that level of quality is in the book, but every now and again it will seep into either getting immature or kind of missing the mark on certain things. I think that's best shown in the first part. It's split into, I think, 3 parts, and the first part is not as good as the other 2 parts. And there's some stuff in the other 2 parts that also isn't good, but the first part is the worst one. There's a point where the book hits its stride in part 2, and I know that before that point characters were set up, but I don't remember how they were set up and of what consequence that was. And that's partly down to the book structure, which I'll talk about later, but for the most part, the first part was getting a little repetitive in some of its content, and particularly the sexual content. Right, let's get this out of the way at the beginning. This book has a lot of rape and assault and sexual content in it, and some of it is played for laughs, and it's all very boring. That's the main thing the book is getting talked about, is for its sexual content. That's where a lot of the detraction comes from, and all of that sexual content is pretty cringe. I knew it was in the book going into it, and I was ready to be the contrarian, because I'm all for looking past the, like, grotesque and kind of sexual content in books if it's for a point. Like American Psycho is one of my favorite books. I'm all for looking past that. But in this, it felt like the author was just kind of like a teenager. I don't know, the way it was used for laughs was very cheap. It was like, is this the only way characters can seem to you as a writer? Like, that's the only way they can be made to seem a certain way. The only way a character can be seen as kind of like a bad character is just if they abuse a bunch of people, or the only way a scene can be funny is if there's a guy with a big penis in it. It was like, is that the only way you as a writer can make that funny? And again, I'm fine with sexual content, but it needed to have a function, and in this book, it did not. Oh my gosh, an old woman is fucking a mute man, and he has a massive penis, and we know he has a massive penis because it's mentioned very many times. Is that not funny? Oh my gosh, the main woman is a total slut. Is that not funny? No. This book has been called misogynistic because of some of that content, and I disagree inherently. It's not misogyny if the main male characters get treated weirder and are more objectified than the women. Then it's just perversion. It's like calling Gaspar Noé misogynist because of that one scene in Irreversible, and it's like, yeah, like maybe, but the dudes get the same treatment. There's a scene in Whale where the main woman is fucking this worker man, and he gets scared, and instead of coming in her, he pisses in her. And she goes, oh my god, you came so much, wow, it's so hot. And the man is like, sorry, I'm a pussy. And then the book says, what the fuck does the book say? Dear reader, please be understanding, even if what is being related is a bit vulgar. Geumbok, that's the name of the main character, wasn't a refined maiden from a middle-class family, and the intercourse that night wasn't dignified. And that's the clear indication that that scene is meant to be funny and not just a bucket full of cringe. Yeah, I don't know how people have said that this book is misogynistic. The men get sexually objectified way more. Any man that comes in contact with this main woman, Geumbok, goes, I just have to fuck this woman. You don't understand. She's so hot. I just have to bust in her. Literally any male character that comes across her, the book will smash cut to, yeah, then they fucked and it was very weird, and then they continued doing what they were doing. And the man is just has to do it. It's not shown from the perspective of the woman as like, isn't this woman a slut? It's more like, aren't these men just Goombas who want to fuck her? But then after that point, it gets to where they get to the small town, Pyongjae, and it's like this motley crew of people. There's like some twins, and there's an elephant, and there's an old fisherman, and they're all living in this one house. And I loved all that. I loved all that stuff when they start the brickyard and they find the old crone's money. The old crone is this bad bitch who fucked this mute guy with a big penis, and she's like this force of like anger and evil in the book, and she dies at some point, and her spirit keeps roaming. And they find all of her money in her old house and they use it to build a movie theater and stuff like that. That was all great. That like middle chunk of the book was easily the best bit. And that's actually very rare, where the middle of the book is the best part of the book. So that's actually props to the book for managing that. Because usually you can go, well, there was some boring stuff in the middle, but the beginning and ending were good. With this, the middle stuff is the best stuff, and it's the most memorable stuff too. Make the first part less annoying or like irritating with the sex stuff and the abuse, and clarify what that meant, and then we're away. Then we've got a fucking book on our hands here. I've got some nitpicks, generally, with some of the writing. I hate the constant... There's this constant thing the author does where after a scene or a paragraph, he'll write something that says, this was the law of XYZ. So something will happen and it will go, this was the law of love, or this was the law of the economy, or this was the law of brickmaking. And I think the only reason it was there was to piss me off. Two characters would fuck, and then the author would be like, this is the law of attraction. And I'd go, would you shut the fuck up? Like, it's so pretentious. It doesn't mean anything when you say that. Just because you do it a lot doesn't mean it then has a function or like a purpose. It doesn't mean anything going into it. Why are you doing that? I can only imagine that it's some kind of translatory thing, that it's like some specific Korean way of ending a paragraph that the author has literally translated. But it was just annoying me. I don't know why it was there. Like, it had no purpose. The godlike narrator voice that's shown in doing that, like, that's the law of XYZ, also impedes a lot of the emotion in other places as well. There'll be scenes where a plot point will happen, and it's a really good plot point, and it's like a resolution of something, and then the narrator will say, and that was all well and good until these two characters died years later in an unfortunate accident. And that's a flash forward to what will happen later in the book. Like, the book deliberately spoils itself, and perhaps that is to deal with the theme of mortality and death, where the narrator is just like, this is all fun and games, but they're all gonna die. And that was okay, but it removed any of the emotion I had in the scene. One example is when the elephant forms a relationship with the main character's daughter, who's this mute girl, and there's an elephant in the book, by the way, and it's this great moment where the elephant reunites with her, and it's a very tender and nice moment, and then the author says, their relationship remains strong until the elephant's death in an unfortunate accident. And then after that, the elephant dies, and it's really sad because it's a fucking elephant. And then they stuff the elephant, and the narrator says, the elephant stood in front of the cafe like that for a long time, and became Pyongdae's landmark, until it was burned to ash many years later. So then the moment is ruined. It feels like the author is just playing with toys, and playing God, and because of that, a lot of the emotion is just kind of robbed from the scene. I don't think it would have added more if we had experienced those events naturally, if the elephant had died without me knowing it was going to happen. It might have actually heightened it, because I liked that elephant. It was the elephant was a nice guy. I felt bad when the elephant got hit by a fucking truck. That was sad. Why did I need to know that going into it? The narrator kept spoiling his own story, and I don't know how much that meant, and I don't know how much this was the law of XYZ thing meant. So those were the two nitpicks that were bugging me the most. It's interesting how unlikable the main woman is, Geumbok. It's like, it could be a deliberate choice, but it's just a weird thing to do, to make your main character such a bitch. She abuses her daughter constantly. Instead of crying or being sad, the main woman pouts instead. That's just one example. The narrator seems like he's going out of his way to make her unlikable, and it was just an interesting choice. Like, I might have been a good choice, but it was interesting. The book is kind of about mortality and how easily things change, and every character in the book has a really eventful life to kind of add to that. the post-war Korea boom, like the building boom that happened just after the Korean War, is matched in this book by the main woman finding all of the money from the old crone and then building a brickyard, and there's this moment of like great development, and it feels like the plot is really moving forward as she builds shit, and it moves forward at a really brisk pace to match the building boom. And that was really good. That made sense to me, and I understood that that was what it was saying. Geumbok causes a boom in the town thanks to her money, and then when General Park takes over, I think that was his name, he was kind of a dictator, then a lot of military figures start coming into the town, and everything good that happened to Geumbok starts going away, everyone starts dying, and then eventually the theatre burns down, and the daughter gets arrested because she's the only survivor. And it makes sense that the book would sour the way it does when you're considering the building boom moving into that dictatorship that happened. All makes sense, all very good. That was all very deliberately structured, and I liked all that, but it was just confusing me then to think about why was in the first part there's just a man with a big penis who fucks the old woman. Why is the main woman always horny? What does that serve? Basically, the book finds its footing properly at about 40% of the way through, and before that point, there's like a love triangle with the main woman and this big mute guy and this like, I think he was a former Yakuza boss or something like that. And then before that point, there's all the weird sexual content where it sets up the characters, and that first 40% I don't really like. It was just kind of annoying me, and I can definitely see how people DNF'd it after that point. Like, if you're not a fan of that content, you would definitely DNF it before it gets to the good stuff. Like, yeah, of course. But I just wanted to commit, and I did, and I enjoyed it a lot more after it moves to Pyongjae. The story moves around a lot. I loved the scene where the old woman possesses a shaman and puts a curse on the main woman, and then the spirit of the old woman is so vengeful and powerful that the shaman has to drown herself to get rid of it. And then every time something bad happens to Geumbok afterwards, she's like, oh, it's the curse! And the narrator also does that whenever a character gets reincorporated into the story, and again, I'll talk about the structure later, but whenever a character comes back into the story, the narrator's really excited about it. He's like, it's the old fisherman, you didn't forget about him that quick, did you? And then when the old woman comes back, he's like, yes, the old woman's back, let's go, baby! Like, yeah, the narrator seemed really pumped to be telling the story, and that I was getting a lot of, like, humor out of that. I was chuckling a lot whenever the narrator was like, just having fun with it. It was very sweet. It goes from main woman has a love triangle, and in between that there's weird sex stuff happening, and then the main woman builds a movie theater and makes a bunch of bricks, and the book is moving really fast there, and then after that everyone dies and burns down, including her, and the mute sweet daughter that we've kind of been seeing occasionally gets sent to prison because she gets implicated as it, and then she spends some time in prison getting abused, and then she gets let out into the wilderness, goes back and builds more bricks, and then the bricks get used to build another building in a second sort of building boom that happened after General Park's regime. So that's the plot, basically, in summary. And when I say that, like, I can summarize the book in 2 or 3 sentences, but a lot happens. It's a very plot-driven book, which I love. I liked how much it did that, and it didn't always feel random. Sometimes it did. When the book's finished, you feel like you've experienced a lot. You feel like you've seen a lot of things. And that's partly because of the book's writing. Like, that's an intentional thing. You feel like you've spent an eternity reading it, and that's in a good way. Like, so much happens. It feels epic in scope, even if sometimes the characterization and the kind of social messaging drops that down a little bit for me. But it does feel epic at points. I loved when it cuts down to just the mute woman. It feels like a lot of the kind of competing voices of the book. It feels like a lot of the people that exist in the book have gone, because they've all died. But you really feel the absence of them. It feels like a lot of weight has been taken off the book, and once it narrows in on one person, it feels different. It feels like you're reading a different thing. And I loved that the book made me feel that. I loved that the book was sort of like written that way, and it made me feel that. That felt very deliberate. So yeah, that's just another thing to point out, is that often the writing comes out really well. The translation is all pretty good too. One quote from the Booker website made me laugh. What was it? The translator said, "This was the first book I've ever translated where I didn't reach out to the author during the process. I literally had 0 questions for him." And I just went, like, what does that mean? What do you mean you had 0 questions? What is the implication of that? That the book was so good that you could understand it without him? Or that the book was so simple and dumb that it didn't need any interpretive quality to it? Like, what does that mean? Why did you say that? The book moves from the post-Korean War building boom, like I said, to the General Park regime, as I said. And you can tell what the author thinks about that regime because the main character's daughter gets just abused a fuck ton. And that's the way that that's shown. And again, that simplicity ties into the immaturity of the book, at least in certain sections, that confuse me about how much of it is intentional. It's super well written, it's very ambitious, even if part of my review has just been shitting on it so far, but it is incredibly ambitious. And I like a lot of it, but again, there's just some small things that bring it down, and we will talk about some of them right now. I love splintered narratives that join together in unpredictable ways. I don't love the movie Magnolia, but that's the kind of structure that I mean, where the relationships between characters are not immediately obvious from the start, and it has that kind of dreamlike logic as characters move in and out of each other's lives and become relevant to a main plot in ways that you don't see at the beginning. I like that a lot, and this book has been compared to Great Expectations, and I think that's a fantastic comparison in structure. The way characters appear again in Great Expectations hundreds of pages down the line is similar to that, but in that book it is a lot more satisfying because the book feels contained within the boundaries of like reality, and the sprawl of character movement makes more sense because it kind of mirrors real life a little more, and then it becomes a lot more satisfying the way that characters connect, like when Magwitch ends up being Estella's dad, for example. That's a really satisfying moment, and it doesn't feel impossible, and it makes every part of that book feel important and of consequence, even the early stuff when Pip is a kid, because things are being set up in a way that you don't realize initially, and it means that the book does narrow into Pip and Estella's relationship being the core of the book, and the way that other characters interact with that is the stuff that's splintered and dreamlike. And I love that. I think Great Expectations deserves so much more praise than it gets even already. Like, I think it's so fucking good. With this book, characters would reappear again for no reason, and it was really difficult to assess what bearing they had on the plot or the themes. Like, what did the one-armed woman with the bees, what did she do? She's in it a lot, and the narrator makes it seem like she's important, and she matters a lot, but what does she do? What purpose does she have? I can't think of a single moment where she does something that's of consequence to the book. And occasionally she will impact the plot, but her impact is not lasting. She doesn't matter, and she doesn't contain any of the social themes of the book. She just kind of is there to be a weird factor to the book. Why does the man the daughter arm wrestles come back and then impregnate her? Surely there was a simpler way of getting to the point where she was impregnated. Why did the character have to come back for that? That was just odd. I didn't know why. Again, it feels like the book is doing that dreamlike logic sometimes for the sake of it, as opposed to Great Expectations where it always felt of consequence. And then Geumbok becomes a man, and I think that was meant to show how much her ambition has changed her, but that felt sort of dumb. And I'll give a quote of that point just to kind of prove to you my confusion over the sexual content of the book and like the immaturity of it. Here it is. This discovery completely overturned previous conventional wisdom that a woman reached orgasm by vaginal stimulation, and therefore pleasure was only possible by the insertion of a penis, and ended up reducing the importance of penis-centered, insertion-centered, male-centered sex, which also reduced the man's role in bed. This was the most revolutionary finding in the history of sex. Meanwhile, before the doctor couple popularized the word clitoris, people referred to it as the male organ, as it looked similar to a shrunken penis, so it wasn't entirely unreasonable for Suryon to glimpse Geumbok's clitoris enlarged from the diminishment of estrogen, and believe it to be a penis. So what you can do as an author is you have a mouse, and you can click on the start of a section, and then you can drag that point to the end of a section, and then when you click the backspace button, you actually delete that section, and once you've deleted that, it no longer is of consequence to the book. And I just wanted to make that author aware that he's able to do that. Yeah, if you needed any more proof that the book could be immature, other than the bizarre, like, extreme Wasp Factory level focus of that quote that I just gave, here's another quote. They were able to track down the warden who had been in charge during the years Chunhui, that's the mute daughter, during the years Chunhui was imprisoned, but he was very old and was suffering from dementia. His daughter-in-law had fastened on him a cloth diaper wrapped in plastic, as he was always shitting in his pants, and every time he had an accident, she stripped him below the waist and spanked him. Mortifyingly, when the students stepped into his room, the warden had been looking at the wall, masturbating, which was in itself surprising given his advanced age. With his own feces, he had drawn on the wall an image of a prisoner hanging from the gallows. I'm all for crassness to sell a point, but this felt, again, like just a humorous beat. It felt like just trying to be funny, like, oh, a man with dementia is writing in shit, very funny. It felt like an extreme to the point where I knew it couldn't possibly be an intentional showing of General Park's regime. I just didn't buy it. And maybe I'm meant to, but it was just not working for me, some of that stuff. It was just pulling me out, or pulling me off, haha, funny masturbation. I was sitting on a 6 or a 7 for a lot of the book, but then the ending with the elephant and the bricks and the tie-in back to the narrative was like devastating and really good. I loved the ending, the last 50 pages or so. It's very sad, it completes the theme of mortality, it makes the characters feel very kind of, important in their own way. So they become unimportant because they haven't left much behind, but then finally they do in a different way to how they intended, and that makes them feel very, like, sad, like very tragic figures, and I loved the way the ending happened. I loved what happened, and the two epilogues are just both beautiful. I can understand the level of abuse that's given to the mute woman by the end. That made sense chronologically in terms of what it was talking about with General Park's regime, but I did not understand a lot of the sexual content, especially the stuff that was played for laughs. And I know that it sounds like I'm being wimpy and whingy, like, oh, I can't like a book if it has sexual content. I still can if it has a point. Like, I would love to read challenging books like that if it feels like they're making some comment about their society, and this book wasn't. Like, what did the man with dementia shitting in his pants prove? What does that prove about Korea at this point in time? It doesn't prove anything. I would love it if it was a statement about how all of Korea was kind of built or born from abuse and sort of that sexual content that happens at the beginning. I would love if that was the statement. That would feel really bold and challenging to say that, but it did not feel that way, sorry. But the book hits its stride, and the ending is really effective, and the second half is more effective than the first, and I love a lot about it. I really do. I still think that what I've said about the book trying to encompass the whole of its nation is true, but I don't think it does it the whole time, and it's not to the whole extent. And that's just my personal opinion. Some people love this book, and the reason they love it is clear to me. And I like it a lot too. It's my favorite on the shortlist for sure. But it's just, there's some things holding it back, and a lot of that is the immaturity, and some of the structural elements of it, the way characters get reintroduced, sometimes felt inconsequential, and that made the function of the social messaging a little kind of like, it's strange and kind of pervious to damage. I can't say I've read much like it, or a book that tries to go as weird as it does with this style. And I would recommend it, definitely I would recommend it. I'd love to know what people think about this one, in the same way that I love to hear what people think about Standing Heavy. Those are the two books that I really want to hear people's opinions of, because they're both just weird, they're so weird, and their messages are so hard to find sometimes, and sometimes the content is immature and strange. Actually, it's very comparable to Standing Heavy now that I think about it. I don't feel like the book got to an ethos all the time when it's being contaminated with, and now the main woman is gonna fuck another worker, and now there's an elephant. That stuff was weird for weird sake, and the sexual content was funny for funny sake, and it was dragging the book down when it was trying to be meaningful. I still very much like the book for sure, but I would prefer something more meditative and kind of assured, like 100 Years of Solitude. That's what I'd prefer, rather than something as haphazard as this. But yeah, again, total recommend. I'm just confused about if the book is doing everything that I'm wanting it to do in my head. Like, I'm just unsure if I'm giving the author too much credit at certain points. It was not a dense or tough read at all. The writing is usually pretty good. It's a unique perspective. Yeah, I give it just a solid 7. Anyway, thanks guys for watching my international booker reviews. It's been fun. I'm not gonna read any more of the long list. I'm gonna do a video sort of ranking them and giving my prediction for what's gonna win, and then I'll react to the winner itself when they do the announcement, and then we'll be done. It's been a good run, I think. I'm happy with some of the books on the shortlist for sure. Make sure to hit the like, hit the subscribe button, light it up like dynamite. Fuck, I just threw up in my mouth.